Across the country, these parents, teachers, and experts are saying the same thing.
There are children getting sick, and I don't think it's worth the risk.
I really hate sending her to school, given the environment that she's in.
Wi-Fi is toxic. It's a different form of toxicity, but it's toxic to our bodies.
He would often complain of heart palpitations or chest pains.
I'd start getting headaches, foggy vision, and just all weirded out.
To expose my kids knowingly is very frightening for me.
For me as a parent, I find it incredibly frustrating and scary and sad that no one's even listening to the concerns of the parents.
Their concern that radiation from wireless computers and this little contraption mounted in the hallways and classrooms of schools can make students sick.
So here we are at the 5th and 6th grade classroom. The meter's showing 500. We're approaching the router, which is where it's going to be the highest. And as the number goes over 999, it's going to show a new digit there. Look, 6 point something. That means 6,000 right next to the router. Out in the middle of the room, it's around 700 or 800. And as we approach the laptops, they themselves have a wireless transmitter in them because they need to be able to communicate with the router across the room. So it becomes a stronger signal right next to the transmitter, which is in the back of the screen. Here you can see close to the front of the laptop where your lap would be, or where the student would be sitting. The numbers are several thousand, 2,000 to 3,000. To give you an idea of how high these are, I went and I took test readings at a cell phone tower in the area. And the readings show pretty much the same as what's in the classroom, but nowhere near what the children would be exposed to if they were leaning over their Wi-Fi enabled laptops. These laptops and the Wi-Fi network produce 3 times the microwave radiation of a cell phone tower. Most of us would never imagine that this would be the case because it doesn't make sense. It was never explained to us before, and we'd never even know about it if it weren't for a meter. Would you as a parent, even for a second, consider a cell phone tower on the school grounds? How about one in the classroom? Well, without even knowing it, you consented to placing one in your child's lap. What does this mean in terms of a health issue? I don't even think we know at this point because this is such a new technology. This is the first generation of humans ever to experience direct and constant microwave radiation.
Today, schools across the country are rushing to install it, but these students say the convenience isn't worth the risk.
I had heart racing, headaches,
Nauseous,
it's a really weird feeling.
weak, and I'm really shaky.
And when they're not at school,
Does it happen on the weekends?
No.
there's no rhyme or reason to the symptoms. They range from headaches to nausea, heart palpitations, even rashes.
What these kids basically have is a non-diagnostic tachycardia. Wolff-Parkinson-White syndrome is it's not uncommon. It's about 1 in 700 kids. So if you got 50,000 kids in the school district, I mean, do the math. You're going to have some kids with, this is an inborn situation where a child has an extra, what we call electrical pathway in the heart. And these hearts can go out of rhythm, and they can be triggered by situations that can disturb heart rate variability. And as a cardiologist, knowing what I know now, it's easy for me to connect the dot that a child with Wolff-Parkinson-White, undiagnosed, exposed to Wi-Fi, could be triggered with an arrhythmia.
Well, 16 by 9 wanted to test the power of Wi-Fi, so we went to visit environmental scientist Magda Havis from Trent University to do another test. Professor Havis's subject, Martin, who calls himself electrically sensitive, is hooked up to a heart monitor, and Havis sets up a wireless computer.
Well, what we're going to be doing is we're going to be taking Martin and exposing him to microwave radiation from Wi-Fi, the same type of thing that we have in schools, for example, and just monitoring his heart to see if his heart reacts to any of the radiation. He won't know when things are turned on or off, so it's going to be a blind study in that regard.
With the Wi-Fi plugged in, Martin's heart rate accelerates in mere moments.
Now I can feel something. It's going through my chest. I feel it down in my legs too.
The closer the router is, the greater his reaction.
A few seconds ago, it was like my chest was actually jumping in the middle here.
Then, seconds after the wireless internet is unplugged, just like that, his heart rate slows down.
Martin, how are you feeling right now?
Fine, I don't think there's anything on.
But listen to this. Those levels Martin was exposed to, well, they're acceptable according to Safety Code 6. So if they're safe, why was his heart racing? Magda Havas has a theory.
So some percentage of the population is reacting to these microwave radiation at levels well below Safety Code 6.
But I'm not sick from Wi-Fi and I use it all the time.
Well, not everyone has the same sensitivities. We have children who have peanut allergies. We have people who are allergic to pollen. They react to pollen. And it's same with electrical sensitivity. Only a percentage of the population react.
Still, Health Canada insists it's done its homework, looked at every bit of science, and that level of radiation won't hurt anybody.
Our safety limits are set on, we use a weight of evidence approach. So there are thousands of articles, thousands of peer-reviewed scientific articles on the issue.
16 by 9 wanted to take a look at that evidence, so we asked Health Canada for its science. They sent us this, a list of 16 studies entitled Specific to Wi-Fi. So we did our own homework going through every study, and not a single one looks at whether Wi-Fi in schools poses a health risk to students. And while other European countries might not be pulling Wi-Fi, they are taking a stand. In 2007, Germany recommended children limit their use of Wi-Fi, uncertain of its long-term effects. And in Britain, a handful of public schools decided independently to remove it. But back in Canada, there's no precautionary approach. Wi-Fi is going up, not coming down, leaving students like Mackenzie Honing with no good option. Go to school and feel sick.
It's just kind of weird. It felt like my heart kept skipping beats.
Or don't go to school at all.
I noticed that every time I came home for the weekend, it started to get better, and by Sunday I'd feel normal. No headaches or anything like that.
Their concern? That radiation from wireless computers and this little contraption mounted in the hallways and classrooms of schools can make students sick. It's Wi-Fi, and Health Canada says there's no risk from the radiation it emits.
That's just simply not true. That's simply not true.
Dr. David Carpenter is a world-renowned expert in environmental toxins in Albany, New York, and he says the Canadian government is just plain wrong.
What we do is look at the weight of the evidence.
But that's what they said they did.
They didn't. The weight of the evidence demonstrates clearly that exposure to radio frequency radiation causes disease. The evidence is strongest for cancer.
Cancer caused by Wi-Fi emissions certainly doesn't add up with Health Canada's insistence that Wi-Fi is safe.
So you're saying that their science is faulty, or their analysis of the science is faulty?
Their science is faulty. And certainly their analysis is faulty. You can selectively look at literature, but there's been evidence for harmful effects of microwave radio frequency radiation for 30 or 40 years.
Why choose to ignore that? How does that possibly benefit them?
When you acknowledge you have a problem and you're a government agency, you have to do something about it.
Environmental health expert Dr. Carpenter says it's time we stop turning a blind eye to the risk.
When you look at the guidelines that have been put in place by Health Canada, do they go far enough to protecting Canadians?
They certainly do not. These guidelines are based on a fallacy.
A fallacy that, according to Dr. Carpenter, is putting children at risk.
It's appropriate for parents to demand that Wi-Fi not be placed in school. Not because we have proof at this stage that it's harming the children, but because we have absolutely no evidence that it's safe, contrary to what any government agency says.
And not heeding the warnings of experts like Dr. Carpenter is leaving students like Jeremiah feeling helpless.
I really am nervous. I don't really like school no more.
Wi-Fi in the heart, basically, clearly more scientific investigation needs to be considered. Clearly, there are children and adults out there with undiagnosed cardiac problems. Even as an adult cardiologist, I would see adult people in their 40s and 50s who have a hole in their heart that was undiagnosed until they went into heart failure. There was an article in the 2008 Journal of Epidemiology that looked at 13,000 children, and more than 10,000 of them had learning disabilities, behavioral problems, ADD, ADHD, and the culprit was wireless technologies. So if you look at some of these wireless technologies, and Ali Johansson, he says cell phones and other wireless are a real danger, and Professor Sanford says the largest human biological experiment ever. I can tell you as a cardiologist, I really agree with that, and I resonate with it because I've seen the damage these things can do. And the problem is, and Magda said this with her whole list, the problem is that you can't see it, you can't feel it, you can't taste it. It's like having an enormous amount of radon right here, so close to your body. The problem here is that with children and adults with these undiagnosed situations, and now you bring them into an environment that could adversely affect the heart, could anything happen? So we have to ask our question, can Wi-Fi or any form of toxic RF set the stage for a life-threatening arrhythmia in a vulnerable individual? That's the question we have to ask. Now, do we want to wait for decades of research as we did with the tobacco industry? I mean, the tobacco industry fought that for years, and the jury is out on that, okay, tobacco causes, lung cancer. Radon, everybody's afraid of, and radon is really big in the northeast United States, where I live in Connecticut, as well as Canada. A lot of houses are built on granite rock here, and everybody gets their homes tested for radon. And we know that radon, when it seeps through the earth and into your body, it's a big cause for lung cancer, despite the fact that many patients with lung cancer who are exposed to radon don't smoke. So it took years of research to show that. But when a real estate agent comes to your house and says, do you want the radon checked? Of course you say, yeah, I'll have it checked, Now, radon is like EMF and RF. You can't feel it, you can't taste it, you can't see it, you can't smell it, but it's a silent killer, just like RF is. So we don't want to wait for decades of research. So what do we do now? And my suggestion here is really to use the precautionary principle. Under the precautionary principle, the threat of plausible, serious, and irreversible hazards to children from exposure to particular environmental stimuli justify public policy action to reduce such exposure, even though scientific uncertainty or ignorance may preclude findings of a true hazard. Waiting for such proof may be more damaging to the public health in the long run. And I embrace this principle. This is the principle that I think you guys should be using in Toronto. This is the principle that your legislatures need to follow.
Health Canada sets the limit at 10 million microwatts per meter squared. Now, that might not mean much to most of us, but in 2008, Toronto's Board of Health said it's way too high and asked Canada's Minister of Health in this letter for much stricter regulations, 100 times more strict. Health Canada never changed a thing. Still, no matter what any guideline says, these parents say they've seen it for themselves and Wi-Fi is harming their kids.
So she had to hold on to friends in order not to collapse on the floor.
She had headaches, and we're not talking just regular headaches. They were extreme headaches where the secretary would call me. I'd have to come pick her up.
According to this doctor, there's good reason to believe these kids are telling the truth and not just making up some excuse to skip school.
There's no question in my mind it exists.
Dr. Jennifer Armstrong specializes in environmental medicine.
The big thing with kids is they're more vulnerable.
Why?
Children are more vulnerable. Their skulls are thinner. Their bodies are not as strong as ours in general. They're developing, their brains are developing. So you expose children to radiation and their little bodies don't handle it as well.
And cardiologist Dr. Stephen Sinatra agrees.
As a parent, if I had a young child, would I want to use my child as an experiment to see if it's going to take 30 years or 20 years or 10 years to become sick? No, not me. And the thing is, we have to sacrifice accelerated education and convenience. And basically, we have to look at the safety of our children. We have to do it as a society.
Havas says since Health Canada isn't controlling Wi-Fi, parents are going to have to.
So are you suggesting that parents should tell their kids, a 13-year-old, a 14-year-old who may be attached to his laptop or his iPad, you should stop using that?
It may not go over so well, but when children want to smoke, and if you're a responsible parent, you allow your 13-year-old child to smoke. In my mind, there's no difference between the two. If anything, I think maybe microwave radiation is going to show up to be much more harmful than smoking, simply because of the amount of exposure that we're seeing in our everyday environment.
You don't want to wait until you can count the bodies before you tell the public that there is a serious potential of harm. And with regard to the issue of Wi-Fi in schools, this is exactly where we are.